Ironically, the more severe Stalin became, the more he was revered by the people. A combination of propaganda and the ever-present threat of persecution turned Stalin into a demigod. This became known as the cult of personality.
The idea, as the cult developed, was that Russian people owed everything to the party, to the state, and to the leader. So, in this sense, the whole society was in debt. One important aspect of this, what I call the economy of the gift, was the importance of thanking Stalin, because you were in debt, and you were thanking for all these gifts and presents, in a sense, all the social services, everything you got. And the slogan, "Thank you, Comrade Stalin, for a happy childhood," represented that idea that children were having a happy childhood because Stalin had provided for them.
One of those happy children was the girl who appeared in this photograph. Called Friend of the Little Children, it was taken in 1936 and shows Stalin holding 6-year-old Gelia Markizova. She remembers the day the photograph was taken.
I got up and took the flowers to the Presidium. When somebody asked me where I was going, I said, to Stalin. Then everybody started shouting, "Kiss him, kiss him!" I remember the feeling of happiness because I was in Stalin's arms. The next morning I woke up and I was unbelievably famous.
Gelia's celebrity was short-lived. A year later, Gelia's father, Ardan, was accused of spying and arrested.
My mother said she wasn't worried at all, because my father simply knew that he wasn't guilty. He said the confusion would be sorted out, and he'd be back soon. It all turned out to be very different. He was shot in 1938.
A year after her father's murder, Gelia's mother was found with her throat cut. The official explanation was suicide, but 50 years later Gelia found out that her mother had been murdered on the orders of Stalin's new NKVD chief, Lavrentia Beria.
In her KGB file, I found a letter to Beria from the local head of the NKVD in Tajikistan. The letter said that Dominika Fedorova Markizova lives in exile in our town. Her daughter was photographed in Stalin's arms. Also, she has gifts from Stalin and 5 photographs. We are worried that she is going to show off. That's exactly how they put it. Then there was a question, what should we do? Beria clearly wrote next to it in blue pencil, eliminate.
Although Stalin's terror eased by 1939, a greater one awaited the Russian people in the shape of Adolf Hitler, the man who regarded Stalin as the real genius of political terror. On June the 22nd, 1941, the Nazis invaded Russia, but Stalin was completely unprepared. Weakened by the purges of the 1930s, almost 65% of the Red Army had been captured or killed in the first few months, and the Nazis were less than a mile from Moscow.
A lot of people say what Stalin did for Russia was that he enabled them to push back the tanks of Hitler in World War II. But I would say that, in fact, firstly, the invasion would never have got so far, because all those people on the western borderlands who welcomed Hitler with open arms would have fought against him. And secondly, the industrial, the agricultural, and the base of the country and its morale would have been in a proper state to fight in 1941 instead of in 1943 to fall.
In a conflict of unprecedented savagery, the Soviet people threw themselves into the war. But even as the Russians died in their millions at Stalingrad or starved to death in the siege of Leningrad, Stalin continued to terrorize them.
If you had been in prison or in camp before the war, you were mobilized, you went to the front. Whatever you did at the front and you came back, you were immediately rearrested and sent back. The repeaters, they were called. Now that, to my mind, does encapsulate the utter cruelty and cynicism of the Stalinist system.
When Berlin fell in May 1945, the Russian people, who had seen 27 million of their compatriots die in the war, felt that they had earned a better future. It meant nothing to Stalin.
The great tragedy of the whole Soviet experience was the sense that people were sacrificing for a day that never came.
Now isolated behind an iron curtain, Stalin's paranoia increased. He found a new enemy in the one people who had suffered more than most during the war.
A lot of leading Jews in all fields were arrested and accused of being in some kind of Zionist plot.
In what became known as the Doctor's Plot, Jewish physicians were charged with poisoning people with drugs and killing them on the operating table.
They were people who had no national loyalty, so it was natural to accuse the Jews. Stalin suspected that they were more loyal to the new state of Israel than to Soviet Russia.
Stalin had already laid plans for the mass trial and deportation of Soviet Jews. We'll never know if Stalin's final solution would become reality. On the night of March the 1st, 1953, Russia's dictator suffered a stroke and died.
It is difficult to even list all my friends and acquaintances. Those closest to me, my relatives, they all died, despite being completely innocent. They were arrested, taken away, beaten up. They are forced to confess to everything and shot. It happened to millions.
The greatest tragedy for the Russian people is that the man who murdered relentlessly throughout his years in power, whom the West affectionately nicknamed Uncle Joe, would never be called to account for his crimes.